everybody that's going to be joining us this morning so far. So good morning to everybody, and thank you very much for coming to attend what is the last in the series of Winning in the Solent region 2020. Today we're going to be looking at managing people through change, something that I think that businesses of all sizes, with business leaders, managers and HR departments have had to face through 2020. So a very apt programme to finish on. I'm really grateful to Ross McNally, the CEO and Chief Executive of the Chamber of Commerce, Hampshire Chamber of Commerce, for being our chair and to take the questions at the end of the session. I'm going to hand over to him in just 1 second. If I could ask everybody to keep the video on blank so we can't see faces, keep mute on, but to put any questions you have to our presenters into the chat box. Thank you very much, and I'll pass you over to Ross.
Thank you very much, Pat. Welcome everybody. I'm Ross McNally, Chief Executive and Executive Chair at Hampshire Chamber of Commerce. I'm delighted to be able to chair the session today, the last in our Winning in the Solent region sessions for this year. Working with Solent University and University of Portsmouth is a great thing for the Chamber of Commerce and for the business membership that we represent. And these sessions is really an example of just how well that partnership is building and developing. We've learned so much over the past few months, 9 months, with regard to managing change in all of its aspects as a result of the pandemic. And I think we're going to have to learn quite a few more around some more issues over the next few months as we start to open up the economy and start to get back onto an even keel and a firm footing. There are a lot of businesses out there who have applied a lot of new techniques, have experimented and challenged themselves. And I know that the kind of guidance that you're going to hear today has been at the central plank of their thinking and the way that they have been moving forward. But it's always a good time to reflect and a good time to plan for the next quarter, the next half year. Strategic planning around change is vitally important. It's not about responding to the here, responding to the now, but actually knowing that these changes are constant, are continuous, and are going to have to be addressed as we move through into the new economies of the future. We have a couple of brilliant speakers with us today. I'd like to introduce Tony Phillips-Munday, who is a human resources consultant at HR Reimagined. A little bit later, she's going to be sharing her thoughts and real life experiences of supporting and motivating people through times of change and challenge, with a clear focus, I would say, on these very uncertain times. So some real life experiences for us, and I think they'll be very helpful, very useful. I'm also first delighted to introduce once again Gillian Saiva, the Associate Professor in Management Practice at Solent Business School and South East Board member of the Chartered Management Institute. Gillian will be helping us to address some key change management practice and principles. She'll be drawing on CMI findings and placing these in a context of a range of pandemic scenarios. So it's, I think, a couple of wonderful speakers, very pertinent, very timely as we come out of lockdown and move into another period of uncertainty with the new tiers and the new structures in place. But as we can look forward to hopefully an end to these very challenging times. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Gillian. Gillian, please.
Lovely, thank you for that lovely introduction, Ross, and hello, good morning and welcome to everyone who's on this event this morning. So I'm just going to hope the technology works here as I share my screen. And this will then help us to begin on this session. So. Okay, so managing people through change. As Ross said in the introduction, We're going to be sharing some body of knowledge from the Chartered Management Institute, from their research findings, but also a body of knowledge from the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development, of which I'm a chartered member of as well. So, as Ross has indeed highlighted, what is change? Well, as we all know, it's the constant. When there's no change, we sort of scratch our heads and wonder, well, what actually is going on? And I think, love it or loathe it, it's something that's in our lives. And what I hope to do during the next sort of 15-20 minutes is maybe just share some context around why it happens, and then how best it can be embraced and managed within organisations. And then with regards to people, it's actually understanding why people don't like it, and being able then to support those people through that change, so an organisation can actually reach its goals. So from the CIPD, why organisations actually need to change? Well, we know that we've all experienced acute change with being the COVID pandemic, but outside of that, we have to remember that the external business environment never stays still. We've got lots of elements going on across the political, the economic, social elements across the world, which of course impact in on what the supply and demand might be for the very products or services that our businesses offer. It can impact on the ability for us to actually acquire staff to come and work within our organisations. And of course, a massive one is of course the development of technology. And we know that the digital agenda sits very firmly on the industrial strategy. We know that clean energy sits very firmly on the industrial strategy. So it's where organisations really have to think about, okay, well, how can they change and adapt to actually shift and move forwards with that? Of course, nothing would be complete without mentioning the B word, and of course, Brexit is a massive change agent for the entire business sectors up and down the country, and also, you know, private sector, public sector, and also third sector. So it's going to have a massive impact, and we know that everyone's, quite frankly, still working it all out. We did mention the COVID pandemic earlier there, and ultimately what we've seen was a lot of acute change, a lot of reactive change, a lot of response to obviously the shock factor, particularly back in the early spring with being forced into lockdown 1.0. And of course there has been lockdown 2.0, which everyone has made attempts to emerge from today, the 3rd of December. It's been a calendar event for everyone wanting to get their business back to normal again. But also we know we've got the tier systems across the country, and at a flick of a switch from our Prime Minister, of course, we know that the level of the tier we all are in could well change, which of course is more change put upon us. And while it's great news that vaccinations are on their way to us, we do know that when we reach 2021, we are going to have some new rules to play against, with, of course, the UK being firmly out of its grace period, having came out of the EU a year ago. So that's going to be a whole new host of change, and of course new trade deals and legislation and all sorts of things. So we're just going to reflect back for those of you that had been present in Winning in the Solent region in early summer, and this was reflected on during the last session as well, to really get a feel of, well, what is normal. We talked about change being the constant. We know that we've got all of these anecdotes, you know, unprecedented times, this is the new normal, but in many ways we're still trying to define what that new normal actually does look like. But we know that what has been experienced and the impact of that change has been sudden, dramatic, it has been life-threatening, and uncertainty has been something that has been a key common denominator to that. And sadly, that uncertainty does continue. The themes, of course, that came out of that are, of course, changes that have been put into place around flexible working, crisis management, and of course, the ongoing change of what your employees' mental health and well-being might actually bring. We know there's a new employment landscape and the need for good governance ahead. But in terms of where we are within this normal, well, it's actually still changing. So that is the constant within that. So again, for those of you that were here in the last session, and remember we did look at Management Transformed and the body of recommendations around the new role of management within all of this uncertainty. And the ultimate finding, which is in the last couple of sentences down at the bottom of the slide, regardless of what's going on, it's how we're managed and led will be the success decider within any element of change management. And I know I can say with confidence that that will be the overriding message of both Tony and my sessions that we're going to share with you today. So why managing change is important? So I think it's good to reflect on the fact that while we all have had to react to this acute change that has been put upon us, we know that strategic planned change is essential for businesses to actually survive. We all know what happened to the dinosaurs, and the ability for any business to adapt and progress and move forward is key to their success and growth. So it's a whole function that sits within organizations, whether it's department, whether it's independent consultants that come in and manage change transformation projects. But ultimately, in order to make change happen, you can put in whatever new IT systems that you might have. You can launch a new brand with a fancy new logo, but we all know through culture, academic logic, with that, it's there's no point in just working on the artifacts. You have to go to the core and bring the people with you. And of course, when you're trying to manage people and manage people through a period of change towards a new goal and to a whole new concept, that is not as easy as what you might like to think it would be, because everyone's an individual. So this is where it is important that organizations do plan change effectively, have it in phases, ensure that due process is upheld and carried out correctly, and employee voice, for those of you that aren't familiar with that sort of HR term, it's really having your employees have a say in what's happening and listen to your employees. So we know there's a lot less of collective representation and communication within our contemporary organizations today. So therefore, with all of the individualism, it's important that everyone does have an opportunity to have their voice listened to. So ultimately, it's generally the HR department, the people professionals that will work at putting together the change activities and actually rolling out the plan to make it happen. For those of you that are a fan of Robin Sharma, who is one of our global leadership gurus, you may be very familiar with his saying. This is something that actually popped up just last week in my LinkedIn feed. And I did smile and say, yes, I'll need to make sure and use this in my Winning in the Solent region session next week. So change is very hard at first. It's certainly messy in the middle, gorgeous at the end. And I think with the gorgeous at the end bit, it's really important that you do begin with the end in mind with any change management project and keep a focus on the end goal. And that will help you weather the storm when it does actually get messy in the middle. Another one for Robin Sharma. Ultimately, when there's an opportunity for growth, as I'd said earlier, change is the medium in which that growth can actually happen through. So why resist it when it's your main source of your growth? We do know that there's a lot of fear that exists out there, a lot of fear of the unknown, the uncertainty. There's a lot of confidence issues that business owners might have around, have I actually got what it takes to take my business from A to B? So this is where a lot of maybe smaller business owners really can benefit from having some coaching and support with that. our dear friend Robin Williams. I felt this is quite a really accurate quote which is put forward here. We know that anyone who is in business and is managing teams of people, what we refer to within the HR world is, of course, managing the employee relationship. And we all know any relationship that we might have, whether it's with family members or with our loved ones, it can have its complications. So in many ways, managing your staff could be that social media post, you know, what is the status of your relationship? Well, you know what, hey, it's complicated. And when you're managing change, that employment status can become really complicated. And this is because human beings by default are creatures of habit, okay? But when we try to bring people into presenteeism and understand, let's just be in the present, let's just understand where we are. If you continue the way it was, there will be no is, okay? And that's where it's a walls experience. And we know you can't be backward thinking when you have to move forward, you have to be in the present. And we know that the pandemic has been the ultimate culture shock and change agent for lots of businesses. In the session we had last week, it was quite refreshing to hear of how the independent digital agency in the Isle of Wight had never been busier, and working very strongly with small businesses, actually putting them online. So those were people who were very, very comfortable just plodding along, and it actually took a pandemic to really push them into that change mindset and get them to embrace digital and get a fully functioning website where their customers could actually purchase off their website. So with regards to organisational issues, yes, it can be very complex trying to manage change. This is where we have seen a rise in project management, Lean Six Sigma, all those lovely things that you may well be familiar with regards to how we go about managing change effectively. It's really important that your line managers within your organisation do get support in project management, in change management. They understand what actually goes on within it. And of course, good leadership skills is key to actually seeing all the processes through to the end. And of course, communication is of course key to bring people with you and to let people knowing what's happening at each stage of the game. Some of you may be familiar with this fantastic book by Dr. Spencer Johnson, Who Moved My Cheese? And this book really gives you an understanding of really the types of people, mindsets of people, and why people just actually don't like change, and that resistance that it actually can kick up for you. I think what's something you can be mindful of is when you are initiating change and you are experiencing a lot of resistance, that resistance might actually be good to you, because it might make you pause and think, okay, why is everyone resisting? Why is no one getting it? Why is no one buying into this new vision? Why is no one understanding why this change has to happen? And maybe in your communication piece, you haven't made it clear of what the reasons for change are, given the stats, given the strategic overview, maybe reflected the change in the marketplace that you have to shift into a different way of operating. So it does pay off to actually be in the present and actually understand what is happening and listen to the employee voice. Again, just a little bit of further detail there around the reasons for resistance. We all do like to be in control. It's the shock, the threat to your status, the fear of maybe people losing their jobs through change, the fear of not being able to cope with the change and maybe embrace a more digital oriented job role, with the business maybe shifting and embracing some more digital infrastructure to the business. So I think it's important to actually be mindful of that and help coach some people through the change process. But I think it's also mindful is that maybe not everyone will actually be prepared to go through the change. Maybe they've been through so many different change modes that they're all changed out. They've got change fatigue, and maybe they might choose to leave your organisation. So that's something that you do need to be mindful of as well. So which character do you think you are within all of this? Are you a person that's totally there? Are you a sniff where you can check out what's happening early and be able to update the corporate vision and almost be ahead of that change curve? Or are you a hem where you're actually going to stick your head in the sand and actually deny that any change is happening, and you are just so fearful as to what's going on? I feel these 4 little typesets do actually give us some really good insight, quite generalist of course, but into the type of players that of course we do see within contemporary businesses. Some of you may be familiar with the Kubler-Ross curve. We did reflect on this. It's akin to, it's obviously the grief cycle. It's overlaid here with business change. And of course, what people have to do when change is going to be happening, maybe a massive restructure, maybe a massive shift to the business, moving its head office abroad or something like that. There will be the denial. There may well be anger, but ultimately people will come through to acceptance and be able to understand that, yes, the change has to happen. But I think it's being able to give people the space to understand that they will go through perhaps some of those negative experiences before they reach acceptance. And of course, it can be maybe longer for some than others. So ultimately, making change management more effective. Effective leadership is obviously key to making it happen right. If you can go in and align your strategy and your culture within your organization, communicate, try not to overmanage it too much, but ensure that you're going to be consistent throughout each stage of the change management process. Trust, of course, is key if you want to take people with you. If you want to perhaps adapt leadership styles to actually, again, bring people with you and understand what's actually going on, be seen to be reaching out to your organisational members, and of course, employee voice. So of course, have lots of opportunity for people to raise concerns and to understand what's happening and to help you understand what's going on in their minds. So ultimately, as we talk about it being, Robin Sharma talks about it being very messy in the middle. And this is where organisations can perhaps get carried away with the emotion of it all. Energy and momentum can start to drain. It is really important that that is kept up and is consistent actually throughout the process. So just again, drawing on what we looked at last time, Management Transformed and Managing in a Marathon Crisis from the CMI, they did cite the importance of some key elements to be able to maintain your productivity and the engagement of your staff. And a lot of these still stand. So how best to plan when it's uncertain, and that's what we looked at last week. Well, a lot of these recommendations here are still valid when, of course, you are planning through delivering on change. It's important to remember that if it's a planned change management program, well, there should be less uncertainty because remember, you know the end goal you're working towards. The uncertain bit is maybe the messy bit in the middle because you're not knowing how people will react. But what is important from a leadership perspective is maintaining your presence, making yourself available, being transparent, and ensuring that line managers actually have support so that they can work through the system. And finally then, this is just an opportunity to showcase as a joint effort between University of Portsmouth and Solent University. We are both delighted to be working with the Small Business Charter and the Department for Business Energy and Industrial Strategy on offering the Small Business Leadership Programme. What this can do for your business is actually facilitate knowledge sharing, discussion and opportunity for you to actually develop a new action plan for your business to actually push through some positive change to enable growth within your organization. It's facilitated through 8 modules, and you will see from that you're effectively doing a strategic overview on all elements of your business. with, of course, at the end, the action plan, and of course then the implementation to what that might look like. And of course the leadership and employee engagement does cover change management within that. So that's my contribution this morning. I'm now going to hand over to Tony with about 30 seconds to spare there. So thank you for listening to the presentation. And Tony, over to you.
Okay, hello. Right, I'm just going to share my screen. Just bear with me one moment. Right. Okay, it's not sharing at the moment. Just give me one moment.
Don't worry, Tony. We know that it did in the practice. So we'll
I know.
for a
Right.
second.
Okay. Talk amongst yourselves one moment.
Ross, would you like to just come back in for a second?
Certainly. Thank you very much, Pat. Tony, while the technology is being sorted out, I thought I might ask Gillian a question or two, if that's okay.
Yes, certainly.
I found fascinating some of the points that you made in your presentation. There's one which specifically regarding, you talked about fear, and I think we can all understand that, particularly the challenges that we've been facing right now has been quite something. So if change does equal fear, but change also equals opportunity, I was wondering, how do you move your team as a whole from one state to the other? Because
yes, that's
a lot about individual management, but how do you get your whole team moving along to that position?
Yeah, that's a very good question there, Ross. Thank you. So yes, fear, and it's the fear of change, but ultimately, as a business owner, you know that you're going to have to do something, otherwise the business might not actually be around. So I think to be able to create a strategic overview for for all of your team is really important, and that will allow you to showcase to them what the state of play is. What is the is, okay? Where are we here and now? And that will give them the opportunity to maybe reflect on obviously what the past markets have been for the business, what was business previously, but then to showcase how maybe those sales markets have dried up. Maybe those sales markets aren't there. Maybe those problems with the customer being able to access the business, say for example, if they're not already online. So I think it's been able to show a really clear business case to your team so that they understand exactly that we can't continue as we were currently because we now have these barriers. We've now got these blockages, or we've now got these issues where maybe that customer has fallen away or whatever, which means then the business will have to look at different ways of maybe acquiring a new customer base, or maybe adjusting the products and services that they were offering previously, so that they can be of obviously more use to the existing customer. Everyone obviously perceives things differently. So I think having a collective opportunity to brief the team as a whole, let them know what the focus, what the end goal is, and then work through with people as individuals. That's actually really important because people will process it at a very different speed. People will have very different filters. We've seen from the various different mice as to what people's filter is and how they might perceive something. And then it's down to individual conversations to actually get people to see it, and very much to obviously allay their fears.
Absolutely. It's all about providing a reassuring context, and I think that's brilliant, Gillian. Thank you so much. Tony, I think we have the slides presentation, so I'm delighted to hand over to you, Tony. Fire away.
Great, right, so I'm sharing, so hope you can see. So managing people through change, I'm looking at it from probably more of a practical in-house experience and exposure to change throughout my career in HR. I am from an HR consultancy, which I've set up recently, but before that, I was in senior HR roles in retail for the last 20 years. And then prior to that, HR and people related businesses, small businesses, large businesses for 10 years before that. I'm a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Personnel Development and on the CIPD committee as well. So let's start. So change, we've talked about change. We know that change is happening every day. It's all around us and it's in our business and personal lives. And I think that when we're hit with large scale change that happens in our personal lives, we just cope with it. I don't know how we do it, but we do. So if we've lost a loved one or we've moved in with a partner, we've been made redundant. And sometimes it's the smaller changes that you don't realise there's a change in your day-to-day lives that become really annoying and frustrating, like, for example, a mobile phone upgrade. And it becomes really frustrating because you know that you liked it how it was before and suddenly all the apps are in different positions. And then, for example, you're driving to work and then you see that the road you normally take is closed, so you have to do a diversion. And those small scale changes really do cause you more issues than perhaps the larger scale. And for some reason, when people start talking about change in business, it all starts to sound very, very scary. And these large scale changes, you know, you have project plans, you have teams working around it, but sometimes it's the smallest of changes that cause the most issues, even if it's the slightest change that you have going on in your business. So what types of change are there? So these are the types of changes that I've seen. So you've had the change out of necessity, and we're experiencing it a lot at the moment through COVID, you know, people losing business contracts. Gillian talked about the PESTLE effects, so all the political, economic, etc. Impacts on people's businesses. And essentially necessity turns into survival mode. And quite often when you're a small business, survival mode is really reactive and perhaps isn't thought through as well as it should be, and it could be handled much better. Then there's change for progress. So a better way of working on a new system for greater efficiency, for example, or new process. And then a change for business advantage. So this might be that you're going to introduce a new product, you're going to have a merger, you're going to acquire a business, you're going to diversify into a new field. And then cultural change, which is perhaps a little bit more subtle and might happen over a longer period of time when you're looking at changing behaviours, and that's really in support of that core value and business objectives. So how change is received in the workplace is really dependent on the environment, so appetite for change. So you work in some businesses where right from the top, the directors, the CEO, the whole business has this real thirst for change. It's always about constant involvement. And then it also could be dependent on the demographics. So you'll have the Gen Z and the millennials, I can never say that word, but they have this real reactionary, they want to change, they want to evolve. And then maybe if you're from Gen X and the baby boomers, perhaps you're a little bit more resistant to change. Type of industry. So if you worked in a media business or a marketing agency, for example, you are going to be more reactive, more transient, more responsive to change. A culture, the culture in the environment that you're working in really does have an impact on how the business thinks, what they're aiming for, what they're trying to achieve. And then the climate, which is more to do with those external factors. And then the resistors to change that Gillian spoke about as well. But you have all of these emotions that go through your team members. So they're fearful for the job, and then they're thinking, will they want to get rid of me? You might be putting something new in, and they're concerned about learning that new task or taking on increased responsibility, and they're worried if they have the capability. You might be changing the way that they work, and this is the one that you always hear, is that we've always done it that way. And then not knowing why it's changing. So you're not communicating, and they're sitting there, well, no one tells us anything around here. And then that whole mixed emotions as they move through that change curve. So planning for change is really, really important. And you need to ask these questions when you're looking at doing any type of change, small scale, large scale. What is the change? Is it a change in the way the work is carried out? Is it a change in the people, the number of people? Will we have to make redundancies? Is it a change in skill set required to carry out that work? So will we need to look at retraining? Or bringing in a different set of skills into the business? Is it a change in jobs content? Do we again need to look at training? Do we need to look at changing job specs? Does it require a change in mindset or a change in behaviour, or all of the above? So for me, making change work for your people. So we know that every change involves people. It could be your employees, your customers, your vendors, whoever it is, it always involves people. And for me, this is really, really important. It's about communication, informing and consulting. If it's a large scale change and it involves more than 20 people, you'll probably be doing collective consultations. But at all stages, you communicate and over communicate. You should have a clear plan and involve the teams. You should analyse and visualise that impact. How would it make you feel if you were putting that change in place? How would you want to be treated? And then navigate those resistance through open dialogue. Don't just let it fester. Make sure you hit those resistors head on. And gain buy-in, sell the vision, engage, work together towards that aim, and encourage two-way feedback and open up a channel for ideas. And it's all about winning hearts and minds. And this, I feel, is a really good way of looking at change. It's about telling that story. So if you think about it as if when you're going to go through change and you need to communicate it to your teams, and you might only have a team of 2, but it's still about telling that story. And I always relate it to looking at it as if you are reading a book. So first of all, you start with, what are we doing? So that is like the introduction, the foreword of your book. Why are we doing it? It's the beginning of the story. It's the setting of the scene. Where are we at? It's progress. It's what's happening as the story heightens. How can you help us? It's about engaging that reader throughout the story. What is the desired outcomes? It's the finale of the story. What does the author wish to achieve? And did we achieve the desired outcomes? It's what did the reader think? It's the reviews. And at the end, it's celebrating that end. It's celebrating that success. And where I've worked in very creative businesses, and in retail it's very fast moving, and what I have done is I've created a change story and made sure that I followed that story throughout that progress of that change. And we're talking about the communication. This is the most important thing. So it's the communication, the involvement and the engagement. And these are the sort of things that I would have done with my teams. within the business. So if it was a larger business, or you're going through a collective consultation, you'd have employee rep groups. You might have team reps. So if you've got small teams around your business, you might have one person from each department, and have focus groups or change champions, perhaps those positive people within your business that will really champion what you're trying to achieve. You can do really simple employee surveys. You can use SurveyMonkey at real low cost, and you can gauge how people are feeling, or if they understand what that change is all about. It's having those casual coffee morning catch-ups, and obviously now they're all a little bit more more virtual. Then having a dedicated ideas email address. And that is really, really key, because if you've got people that are concerned about the change, or they want to give feedback and ideas, it's really good to have a dedicated mailbox so that it doesn't get lost in the ether of your hundreds of emails that you must get each day. Newsletters, postcard updates. I used to do desk drops and have engagement sessions, have a comms notice board, an internal comms and engagement plan. They only have to be really simple, but plan out when and how you're going to communicate with them, and really bring your team along with the journey. The temperature check. So we've done employee surveys, but check every now and again that people still are on board. They understand what their contribution is to the change, and are they still okay? Having a frequently asked questions board, information drop-in sessions, and perhaps a video message from the CEO. So 2020, I think that we all are going to say that this is a year to forget, but what a lot of change that we've gone through. You know, we as a country on the whole, we never really wore face masks. Now it's mandatory, and it's something that's going to be around for a long time. We've got used to it. We started off through that change process where we didn't really, there was resistance to wearing them. We didn't want to wear them. And then we'd go to a shop and we'd forget, and we'd go into the shop and then people say you need to wear your mask. Now it's become part and parcel of what we're doing. Working from home, you know, people are working from home on their dinner tables. You got, at the first lockdown, we had children around, and you know, noise and trying to continue business as usual. And then we had all these messages from the government, and furlough, and stay at home, go to work, go back to working from home, and so forth. And we really are forging ourselves forward in that period of significant change. So I pulled out a few stats that I've seen throughout the pandemic, and I think that this is really important to note that you are not alone, and there's a lot of people feeling very, very concerned about what's been going on. 88% of employers are concerned about the impact of COVID-19 on their employees' mental health. 36% of furloughed workers have increased their alcohol consumption, and 26% for those working from home. Then you're getting this mindset change. About 83% of workers would like their employer to encourage more home working. That has really not been the way we've worked on a day-to-day basis before, but now the pressure's on that people, where they can, want to work from home more. And this is important. 90% of HR and company directors are overwhelmed by the challenge of getting their teams back to work, and back to work in the way and the productive way that they used to. 24% of the UK say they feel more lonely, 26% are sleeping less than normal, and only 20% of CEOs believe they have the strategy needed to manage disruptive change. 57% of working mums think lack of childcare during the first lockdown has hurt their career, and 4 in 10 remote workers feel drained by virtual meetings. There's a whole host of issues, concerns, and problems that we're going to be faced for time to come. So you'll have access to the slides, but when we were looking at how we were thinking remotely, this is some of the information that I gave to some of my clients in terms of what to think about when you have your teams working remotely and you're having to change the whole way of doing things. And the key areas for me were making sure that you were maintaining those relationships, thinking about your culture, looking at the well-being of your teams, continuing to look at how you look at people's performance and how you develop them, and most importantly, how you communicate and engage. I'm not going to go through all these points with you, but you will have access. So if you'd like to see some of the ideas that are in here, but those are the areas that became more important as we were all starting to work remotely. And again, I'm not going to go through all of these, but these were a think tank, just some of the ideas to get leaders of businesses trying to work in different ways, trying to communicate, engage. Some of them are fun and silly, but others were, you know, really important to look at the well-being of their teams. And some people have really changed the way of working and how they communicate through this lockdown and through the furlough period. Sometimes it's worked, sometimes it perhaps is actually better to have that face-to-face or a combination of both. So my last slide is really just to remember, and especially if you're in a small business, you might not have the peer group around you, you might not have an HR department, but you're not alone. There are so many people out there in the community that can actually help you. It doesn't have to be a paid resource, but there are a lot of networking groups. I'm part of HR networking groups where even the most seasoned HR professional, especially through furlough, is asking questions about what do we do about X, Y, and Z. And we're all there and we're all helping each other through Facebook or WhatsApp groups and so forth. Maybe look at having a mentor. I mentor a couple of HR people, managers that perhaps have got into their first managerial roles, and they're in sole HR roles, and they don't feel that they can speak to their manager because they're expected to know it all. So I've just been there at the end of the phone or video call just for them to have a sense check. So you might want to look for a mentor. There are so many industry support networks and helplines. And then from a people point of view, you've got the ACAS website and helpline. These are all my go-to places when I want to research something. The CIPD website, the government website, they are so useful. And especially through this pandemic, they have been updated daily. And then you've got third-party providers. So, you know, perhaps if you're going through larger scale change, you might want to engage in a consultant, a change consultant, or a more senior HR provider to be able to help you. But that's if you haven't got the resources in-house and perhaps you have the funds to be able to do that. And then there are things like this, webinars and seminars that really help you to get different perspectives. So I think it's just really important that you know that you're not alone. So that's for me, and I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Tony. That was absolutely brilliant. And many apologies for the slight technical difficulties, but I thought you handled that pressure remarkably well.
Thank you.
If I could invite Gillian back, I think we'll now have a session of Q&A and covering on some of the issues that you raised, but also importantly, if I could ask the audience please to put in some questions to the chat. I'll be very happy to ask those questions as a priority. So please just put your questions directly into the chat and I'll follow through. But Tony, first of all, I really liked your storytelling concept. I thought that was excellent. You know, managing people through change, but contextualizing that in a storytelling style, I thought was a very good idea. But what occurred to me is, how do you ensure that the ownership of that story is transferred, if you like, to the team? Or maybe putting it another way, when do they become the author of that story?
I think that they're a contributor to the story as opposed to the author. So the leadership team, the business, they have got this idea for change that they want to go through, and it is about selling that vision and but bringing people with them. But the way I am a very creative HR person, so I create this story. So the last one I did, it was about an extraordinary journey, and we were having a large scale system implementation that actually impacted the whole business, every single touch point, and that was globally. So there was newsletters, there was desk drops, there was sessions, we had change agents, it was large scale, but at every point we got people involved. So we got them taking pictures of the change that's happened, got them putting articles into the newsletter. We had a blog, so we had people putting their viewpoints. We had interactive question and answers and coffee mornings. So it was about bringing people with us and part of that story. But each person had a contribution to that, and they could see that and got the reward from it.
Absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much. That's clarified a lot. We have a question in from Craig Willis, and so I think I'll throw that open to both of you. It's, do you have to manage change differently in a small business, say 10 to 30 people, compared to a very large business? Gillian, kick off. What do you think of the issues?
Okay, so the process is still the same, regardless of the size of the organisation. What you will find is the volume of the employees will, of course, dictate maybe some of the methods of communication that you seek to use. So while Tony had a really good example there of managing global change, where, of course, it is remotely across time zones, different cultures, different mindsets, different cultural norms within each of those office sites. It is important to be mindful of that and then tailor your communications to support that audience. I think picking up on what Tony also said about being mindful of the generational impact across your employees, because a baby boomer will have a very different filter to a Generation Z in terms of how they will be processing this change. The shock, denial, anger, that journey on that change curve through to acceptance may be faster or slower depending on generation, depending on cultural norms, etc. So it's been in that position to be timely, be available, and use a mode of communication across all of those staff members.
Tony, in your experiences working with a range of companies, have you noticed a difference between the smaller and the maybe medium and larger companies?
I think with the larger business, there are perhaps some greater complexities involved with it, because you are, as Gillian says, you're involving a wider audience, but you're also getting a lot of siloed groups that are working towards that change. Whereas in a small business, I feel that you can get more involvement from right across the business. And I worked in a small business that was growing, and we all got involved with that change. And I think that you get that buy-in, you bring people with you, and I actually enjoyed being part of that change process because you had that full involvement, whereas you might be just doing a piece of that change. But when I was talking earlier, I was talking about perhaps larger scale change, and I've seen large scale, but I remember I was working in a business that was growing, and it's a positive change because it was growing. They were going to move an office, and they were looking for offices very close by and found one which was only a 5-minute drive away, but we didn't even think that it would have the impact on the employees that it did, because whilst it was 5 minutes away, it was all right for us in our cars, but those that used to walk from the train station or walk to work, it was in the opposite direction, 5 minutes, and actually we had so much complaints and issues from people because we completely overlooked the fact that it was going to impact them in that way. And that's why I think when you're doing small scale change, it's almost important to focus more on it than you would perhaps in large scale.
Absolutely. I think you're so right. And it's those areas where we can trip ourselves up, isn't it, as managers, I think. Gillian, you mentioned listening in your presentation as well, and I suppose we can talk about the art of listening, if indeed there is such a thing. But what would you say is the art of listening with regard to teams, and how is this best achieved? I mean, I'm thinking about the problems and pitfalls now in the current situation. Listening is a great virtue and very important from a management point of view, but it's very difficult in these change times.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start off with something you've probably heard before. So we've got 2 ears, but only 1 mouth. So which is the most important? It's actually the listening. And I think from that mindset, it's when we're sort of saying, oh yes, communication is so key during change. You must communicate. But that's 2-way communication. So you can have your briefing document, you can think of your comms plan as to how you're going to get it out there and make sure that every single person in your business will have a touch point and will actually receive that. You then need to almost double the bandwidth space for what you're going to hear back. And then it's almost the talking or the sharing out of that information in the first instance is really just the springboard. The rest of the effort must then go into listening. Because then from that listening, it may be a lot more conversational, it may be negotiable, you know, it sort of takes it on a very different parallel. It may have to go down to an individual level, like the poor people that were walking from the train station to the normal office. Well, you might have to reach out to each one of those individuals and understand what that impact is for them. But that's where you're going to recognize the employee voice, and that's where you're going to manage the engagement of your staff and take them with you, because it's so important to take people with you. And something that Tony will be familiar with, it's managing the psychological contract. So it's what goes on in their hearts and minds about what they expect from you as a business owner, manager, employer. That's sort of over and above what's written on the contract of employment. There is an expectation that they would be thinking of you as an individual employee. Because remember, we've moved on from the days of us all being in the big factories and the satanic mills, haven't we? Where everyone was just a number. We all are individual now, and that's very much how you're expected to treat people. And I think that echoes Tony's really good example of poor Fred, who was, you know, walking from the train station, that now would have to do a 45-minute walk probably to get to the office rather than a 5-minute walk.
I think the interesting thing about that psychological contract is it has been very greatly challenged over the recent times. And I've noticed in conversations with businesses that this idea of presenteeism is starting to rear its head again. So Tony, is there an issue of presenteeism in remote working? In other words, feeling the need to be at your computer, for example.
Yeah, I think so. And I think people are feeling the pressure that they have to sit at their desks longer. And you know, in research and things that I've read, people are perhaps working longer hours than they should be. They're not having breaks. And they're really concerned that, you know, that they want to be seen to be working. But I think that we all need to change our mindsets. The leaders in particular need to change their mindsets about how we work. Now, obviously, until about April next year, it's quite likely, and maybe beyond, that we will be working from home where possible. And then if not, obviously, it's in a changing environment. But I think for me, I think what it would be really good and a really forward thinking is where people can do a combination of working in an office and working from home, but perhaps it be more fluid. Then I think that would really start to get significant engagement with your team and really starting to look at that work-life balance. And people do have lives, and I think that's where employers have seen it more. You know, they've seen the kids at home and you know, all sorts of things, the postman knocking the door and so forth. And I think people shouldn't feel under pressure they have to sit at their desk. And I know that some businesses are saying, right, between 1 and 2, no one is going to be on a Zoom call. You're all going to have a break, whether it's lunch, reading, have a nap, whatever it is, so that people are starting to get into a work pattern that's healthy. But yeah, I want a forward-thinking world, but I do really value that face-to-face interaction as well as the opportunity to break away and have that time where you can have a quiet space to move things forward.
Absolutely. I think, you know, managers could be accused of abdicating their responsibility sometimes for
Yeah.
their daily management communications, etc. It's very easy, almost as moving towards a self-directed management style, but that's quite a difficult thing to achieve for everyone because we're all different people and we have different challenges.
Yes.
I take on board the point about well-being, which I think is very important. There was a question, Gillian, around productivity. And I don't just mean from a corporate point of view, but I mean from an individual point of view and the feeling of trust. Do you think managers are coming to terms with remote working and those issues around trusting individuals to, in a way, self-manage and achieve their productivity, be more outcomes oriented?
Yeah, absolutely. You've hit the nail on the head there, Ross. Being more outcomes orientated. Productivity should be measured on outputs, and how that individual achieves those outputs is, of course, down to them. Someone might be a morning person. Maybe they want to go out and maybe have get up early and then maybe take a break at 10 to 12, or take a break 2 o'clock to 4 or something like that, so that they can maybe pick up children from school. Maybe it's the best time of the day to do whichever sport or hobby that they like to do. If they want to go out and catch the evening sunlight, in winter time or something like that, if they're a photographer, and if that works for them and lifts their heart and their motivation, well, absolutely great. They can make that time back later. So I think it's understanding, I think it was mentioned in the session last week, it's psychological contract 3.0 now, because of course there's a psychological contract 1 and 2.0, which was the 2.0 was very much focused around the more millennial mindset of, I will only work for you for 2 or 3 years, I'll get from you what I want to be developed, and then I will go on to somewhere else, because it's this more individualistic approach to career management and development. But the benefit the business has is by having motivated workers and a healthy amount of attrition that will allow new talent to come into the business. I think arguably moving forwards, where we're going to be awash with talent because of the economic downturn, we know it's already predicted 2021 will have up on 2 to 3 million people unemployed. So the war on talent is going to be very different in that mindset. But ultimately, when the economy bounces back again, and of course it will be in a very different terms, in a non-EU trading context or less of EU trading context world or whatever, maybe focus of employees will be with partnering with organisations maybe more out west. And something like that might mean that, okay, well, if you're reporting into trading partners that are in California, well, they don't wake up until 4 o'clock GMT. So maybe you can adjust your working day to actually make the benefit of that. I personally have had experience of that myself. When I was in industry as an HR manager before coming into the university, I reported into the Los Angeles office of Princess Cruises. And quite often my day went on through to 11 o'clock in the evening, reporting into the management team there. And trying to go to the office at 5 o'clock when they woke up at 4 was an absolute disaster. So it's being mindful of that. And as we become more global in our business operations, thinking, okay, well, you might be working with India, you might be working with the Philippines or Singapore. Well, that's an early morning start if you want to get the Philippines. So it's then looking at how you maybe align the people in your business to cope with the time zones. I think time zone working is going to be the big focus moving forwards, and perhaps that home working is certainly the way forward with that, because as Tony says, you can have a nap if you want to recharge.
Indeed. Tony, I was wondering, building on that, do you have some examples, or an example of a small business that's through this pandemic and has really made a success out of this employee engagement piece, and so those staffing may actually state that they feel more secure and more motivated than perhaps they were before the pandemic? Has that culture changed? Have you got an example where you've seen that?
Well, I'm working with one client. They are a team of 19, so it's smallish, and they were working remotely, and some of them were on furlough. But I think it was down to the leader, and obviously we generated ideas between us, but he was so forward thinking about how he could do it. And he did quiz nights with a drink at the end of the day. He allowed people to work their hours around their circumstances. He appreciated the fact that some people were shielding, and that they weren't able to work in the same way that they were, and he was very responsive to that. But I think it was about the mindset and the way that he was looking at it, and he was very concerned about his business, and he thought he was going to end up having to make people redundant. But he hasn't. And partway through that, he did do an employee survey as well. And he got a really good response to it. And he wants to build upon that. He's engaged me to help look at that employee engagement side and look at all the values and what have you, because he doesn't want to stop it from there. But he's always thinking about how he can make it a better place. So even for the fact is they won't be having a Christmas party, he's already thought that he's going to send a meal to everybody's house that they can just have, and then be on Zoom later on for a drink. So, I think it's down to that leadership and that innovation.
Leadership and creativity, absolutely.
Yeah.
I've got a question for, building on that really, I've got a question for both of you. It does tend to lead to the thought, what do you think we will lose once we all go back to, well, we'll say a new normal, which I think will be the blended approach of remote working, and as you've all said. But what is the risk? What do you think we may lose? So what's the magic that we might lose?
Communication and innovation, those coffee, the water cooler chats, on the stairs, just seeing somebody in the lift or wherever it is. I know face-to-face meetings, and just the creativity and the buzz that you get. I think it's the camaraderie. I miss people. So I think people do feel lonely. And whilst a lot of the stuff that I do is quite independent, I feel quite lonely just being at home and no one to talk to. And so I think there's going to be those sort of elements. But it's going to take harder work, I think, to ensure that communication and that innovation and that development of that organisation happens. We're going to have to change the way that we measure people's performance, how we have performance management, how we can guide them on a day-to-day basis. Usually when somebody's new, perhaps it's a process job, payroll, for example, you sit alongside somebody and then you're showing them. So you're showing them how to do something. You're sitting there, they ask across and ask you questions. So you're going to lose that element of it as well, sort of learning on the job. And I know the company I used to work with before, they've now looked at it by saying that you have to be in the office a maximum of twice a week, and each department has a specific day of the week that they're allowed to come into. And I just feel that that's really restrictive, because you really want to engage with the wider business. So it's going to have a whole host of issues that we're all going to have to get through and learn from.
Gillian, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I echo a lot of what Tony has said, and I think ultimately there's pluses and minuses with each type of working, isn't there? I think in many ways with having just the flexibility, and I think the peak in productivity that has happened with people being able to actually click in and out of meetings instead of running across real estate, jumping on tubes, trains, automobiles, you name it. And I think we have to be mindful from a clean growth perspective what we actually go back to, because we know that if we're going back to this physical approach, our commitment to clean growth across our economy is going to be compromised, because ultimately our it's putting fumes into the atmosphere. So I think we do need to be mindful of that as a bottom line. So it's finding a much more common ground on that. I think for the people who were very productivity orientated, and everyone's very, very busy, and I know it sort of shifted my mindset. Why would I spend an hour driving into Southampton, rush hour traffic of a morning, when I can be doing an hour's productive work and manage a back-to-back diary with just a click in and out of my mouse, rather than maybe going from physical office space to office space as part of that day. Now, that sort of behaviour that, of course, we're all very used to has a very detrimental impact on our health and well-being. Of course, we know that working remotely, loneliness, as Tony has reported, can also have a detrimental impact on your health and well-being. So it is really that common ground. But I think a lot of businesses, of course, have to focus on the bottom line. And if they can do without X amount of 1,000 square footage of office space and the overheads that costs, SME that I'm familiar with actually has head offices just off Trafalgar Square, £300,000 per year. They've got 5 business sites dotted around the home counties in the south coast. They're surrendering their office space in the centre of London because they're realising they can actually run their business just as efficiently by people working remotely, and then having obviously the more customer focused office sites based around the south coast. But certainly the central London office base, I think it's actually gone now.
I think this is a very exciting time of change in reality for businesses. I think this the challenges have created opportunity, and I think that we're going to see an awful lot of competitive advantage coming through for those businesses who get this right and turn this into a real positive for their cultures. And we're already seeing it. We're in the foothills of it, I'm sure, but we're already seeing it out there, and we're here to support them for doing that. Thank you so much, Tony. Thank you, Gillian. It's been a superb presentation.
Thank you.
Greatly enjoyed the Q&As, and apologies if I just threw questions at you and you thought, where did that come from? But I think it's been a really exciting presentation today, and I think it builds on the other presentations that we've done. I think as a programme, the Winning in the Solent region this year has been a very enjoyable process, and I hope that our audience have gleaned a lot from it. Thank you so much, Tony and Gillian.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I'd just like to say a few words about the relationship between Hampshire Chamber and the university. Hampshire Chamber is over the past 9 months has really been looking to build on what we call our Chamber of Solutions programming, which is making sure that we build a community of practice for businesses across the county. We've worked in partnership with both universities and other stakeholders, and we want to continue to do that in the coming months and years. So if you want to get involved with Hampshire Chamber and get involved in our relationship with the 2 universities, please get in touch with me, and I'd be delighted to see how we can engage your business and your people in taking forward whatever the issues, whatever the opportunities, whatever the challenges that you have. Hampshire Chamber is here really as a chamber of solutions for you. And I hope to be able to prove that to you and your colleagues in the coming months and years. Once again, thank you for joining us. If you have any further questions, please email them through. We've got an email address, which is engagement@solent.ac.uk. That's engagement@solent.ac.uk. send your questions, send your needs, send your queries through to that email address, and we will respond. We'll follow through. This program has been recorded, and we'll be following through with a follow-up with the recording of this session when it becomes available. And we also, please, when you get that, encourage you to take the 2 minutes to complete the survey that will follow in that email. Both Solent University and Portsmouth University would really appreciate your feedback. It helps us to build this program and to make a success of it. I'm Ross McNally. Thank you so much for attending, and look forward to building a program for next year. Take care and kind regards, and wishing you all a very, very good 2021. Many thanks.